What if everything you believe about the ideal penis size is shaping your confidence, your erections, and even the way women respond to you without you realizing it? Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever wondered whether the size of your penis affects how a woman feels about you, not just physically, but psychologically? Most men over 50 have carried this question silently for decades, and the truth is, the fear behind it often damages their erection, their sex drive, and the way they show up in intimacy far more than the size itself ever could. I'm Dr. Emily Collins, urologist, and today I want to take you into a side of female psychology that most men never hear about, a side that explains why your confidence, your presence, and your understanding of your own body matter far more than any number you've measured in the mirror. Because here's the reality. When a man is insecure about his penis size, that insecurity shows up in his erection quality, in the way he touches, in how he anticipates failure instead of connection, and in how pressure replaces pleasure. And women notice this long before they ever evaluate your size. Their brain responds not just to your anatomy, but to your energy, your confidence, and your ability to create emotional and physical safety. In other words, the psychological meaning of size to a woman often has less to do with your penis and more to do with your state of mind. When a man feels inadequate, his body follows that belief. Blood flow drops. Arousal fades. Erections become unpredictable. But when confidence rises, everything else follows. And this is why understanding this subject is so important. Not because size defines you, but because what you believe about size determines how your body performs. Many men don't realize that their erection depends on emotional signals as much as physical ones. A man who trusts his value activates his nervous system differently, allowing stronger blood flow and more consistent sexual response. A man who doubts himself triggers the stress mechanisms that shut erections down. Women respond to that difference instinctively. Their attraction is tied to your confidence, not your measurements. Before we go deeper, tell me something. Have you ever felt this pressure affecting your performance? You can share your experience in the comments, and while you're here, make sure to like this video and check if you're already subscribed to the channel. What you're going to discover next may surprise you even more, and it will set the foundation for everything that comes afterward as we continue exploring what truly shapes desire and confidence. From the moment a man becomes aware of his body, a quiet comparison begins to take shape, usually long before he ever has real sexual experience. Boys hear comments in locker rooms, jokes from older men, exaggerated stories from friends, and by the time they reach adulthood, a belief has already been planted that the size of their penis is a measure of their worth. What most men don't realize is that these early impressions imprint deeply into the nervous system. They shape how you interpret intimacy, how you judge your own erection, and even how confidently you approach a partner. Over time, these beliefs harden into something that feels like truth, even though it was never based on science or female psychology. As men age, these internalized ideas begin to collide with the real biological changes that happen after 50 and 60. Erections no longer appear instantly the way they once did, blood flow becomes more sensitive to stress, and arousal depends far more on mental state than on raw physical stimulation. But instead of understanding that this is simply physiology, many men misinterpret these shifts as evidence that they are no longer enough. A slower erection suddenly feels like confirmation of inadequacy. A moment of distraction becomes a sign of decline. The mind, conditioned for years to believe that size equals value, interprets every sexual change as a threat to identity. This is why so many men feel pressure long before intimacy even begins. They enter a moment of connection already measuring themselves mentally, already anticipating that they may fall short, already fearing that their partner is evaluating them with the same harsh standards they apply to themselves. And of course, the body responds. Anxiety releases adrenaline, blood vessels constrict, and the erection becomes weaker or inconsistent. It is not the penis that is failing, it is the belief system surrounding it. the psychological weight of comparison becomes heavier than the act itself. Women, meanwhile, are responding to something entirely different. They are perceiving emotional presence, sensitivity, engagement, and confidence. Their brain is wired to evaluate safety, connection, and responsiveness, not numerical size. But a man trapped inside his internal narrative often cannot see this. Instead, he becomes self-focused, overthinking, detached from sensation, and disconnected from the moment. This is the silent pattern that undermines performance after midlife, not lack of physical capability, but the accumulated impact of decades of psychological conditioning. Understanding how these beliefs were formed is the first step toward dismantling them. When you start recognizing that the pressure you feel is not a biological truth but a learned script, your body begins to respond differently. Blood flow improves when the mind is calm, erections strengthen when fear is removed, and intimacy deepens when comparison stops dominating the experience. As you begin to separate who you are from the myths you've absorbed, your confidence starts to shift in a way that directly influences your performance, your presence, and the quality of your connection with a partner. Science tells a very different story from the one most men have carried in their minds for a lifetime. When researchers study women's preferences in controlled environments, where they can respond privately, without social pressure or the influence of media, the results are consistently surprising to men. The ideal size is not an extreme measurement, not something exaggerated in adult films, and not what men often imagine. Instead, women tend to favor what feels balanced, comfortable, and emotionally connected. Their brain responds to cues of safety, trust, and presence long before it registers anything about your measurements. In fact, in neurological studies, areas linked to emotional bonding and anticipation light up far more strongly than areas associated with visual arousal. What most men misunderstand is that women process intimacy holistically. Their experience is shaped by a combination of emotional responsiveness, rhythm, touch, voice, eye contact, and the overall energy a man brings into the moment. When women describe what makes a sexual experience memorable, they rarely talk about size. They talk about connection, confidence, authenticity, and how the man made them feel. The psychological meaning of size is therefore more symbolic than literal. It represents strength, presence, and security, but these qualities come from the mind, not the anatomy. A confident man with average size will evoke more desire than an insecure man with above average size every time, because the female brain responds to emotional cues far more than physical ones. Another key insight science reveals is that women experience physical pleasure differently from men. Their anatomy is not primarily stimulated by penetration depth, but by pressure, consistency, and the emotional climate created during intimacy. When a man approaches the experience with tension, insecurity, or self-doubt, her nervous system picks up on it immediately. Her arousal diminishes, not because of his size, but because his energy signals uncertainty instead of connection. Studies in sexual psychology show that female desire is highly attuned to emotional attunement. A man who pays attention, who listens, who syncs with her rhythm, activates more pleasure pathways than a man focused on performance metrics. This is why so many women report that size matters far less than men think. The female brain is wired to respond to context, how she feels about you, how safe she feels with you, how confident you appear, and how well you read her signals. Even when researchers ask women directly about preferences, the majority describe something very different from the male fantasy narrative. They prioritize comfort, emotional intensity, and the sense of being desired. They speak about the man's presence, the way he touches them, the buildup of anticipation, and the feeling of connection that shapes the entire experience. Understanding these scientific findings changes everything. It redirects your attention from what you fear you lack to what truly creates desire. It shifts your focus from comparison to connection. And as you absorb this new framework, your mind begins to release the old patterns of evaluation that have quietly sabotaged your erections and confidence for years. What you bring emotionally and energetically has more impact on a woman's desire than any measurement could offer, and once you internalize that truth, your body starts responding with more ease, strength, and consistency. As men age, they often assume that a woman's attraction is shaped by the same things men focus on visually. But in reality, the female perception of desirability shifts dramatically with maturity, and it becomes increasingly tied to qualities that have nothing to do with size. After 50 and 60, most women don't prioritize anatomical attributes, they look for signs of vitality, health, emotional presence, and the ability to create a meaningful connection. What truly influences their desire is not the number of inches a man has, but whether he shows up with energy, attentiveness, and genuine engagement. This is why men who take care of their vascular health, maintain consistent erections, and project calm confidence often attract stronger responses than men who rely solely on physical assumptions. When women describe intimacy in later life, they talk about reliability, comfort, warmth, and emotional resonance. They respond to a man who knows how to listen to their body, who adjusts naturally, who is present rather than distracted by worries about performance. A man who is confident in his penis, regardless of size, triggers more arousal than a man who treats intimacy like a test he might fail. Women feel the difference instantly. A steady, relaxed erection communicates vitality and stability. A man who is comfortable with his sexuality creates an atmosphere where her desire feels safe to rise. These psychological signals shape her experience far more powerfully than anatomical measurements. Science supports this. Research in sexual psychology shows that women's arousal increases when they sense emotional attunement, when a man mirrors their pace, notices subtle cues, and maintains a rhythm that builds anticipation rather than rushing toward an outcome. This synchronization activates reward circuits in the female brain that deepen pleasure and amplify connection. Even more interesting, studies reveal that female satisfaction correlates strongly with a partner's confidence level. Not arrogance, but grounded assurance, the quiet, stable belief that he is enough and that he can create a meaningful experience. This emotional competence influences her body's response more than physical attributes ever could. For many men over 50, this realization becomes a turning point. They finally understand that the pressure they've carried about size has distracted them from the qualities women value most. When a man focuses on his perceived limitations, he disconnects from the moment. When he focuses on connection, his body naturally performs better, erections become steadier, and intimacy becomes richer. Women are not evaluating size the way men imagine. They are evaluating presence, your tone of voice, your touch, your focus, the steadiness of your breathing, the attention you give to her pleasure and comfort. And this is where the idea of ideal size dissolves completely. What feels ideal to a woman is the experience you create around intimacy. She remembers how you made her feel, the confidence you carried, the patience you showed, the sense of safety you provided. These qualities influence her attraction long before she ever thinks about measurements. When men shift their mindset from performance to connection, their entire intimate life transforms. Erections strengthen, anxiety fades, and the psychological distance created by years of comparison begins to disappear. As men move into their 50s and 60s, something subtle but powerful begins to happen inside the mind. The body changes, yes, but the way a man interprets those changes often creates a far deeper impact than the physical shifts themselves. A slower erection, a moment of hesitation, a temporary loss of firmness, these are normal physiological responses to aging, stress, or circulation. Yet many men instantly turn these small fluctuations into evidence of decline. Their mind runs to the worst conclusions. They begin to believe they are losing masculinity, losing desirability, or losing the ability to satisfy a partner. And once that belief takes root, it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle that quietly shapes their sex life. The psychological trap is simple: men compare themselves not to reality, but to a younger version of who they once were. They judge their erections against the automatic, effortless responses they had at 25. They judge their stamina against the body they had before responsibilities, stress, or health changes. They judge their penis size against an artificial standard shaped by decades of cultural noise, unrealistic media, and silent assumptions. This distorted internal comparison becomes the lens through which they interpret every intimate moment. And instead of approaching sex with curiosity or connection, they approach it with pressure. This pressure is devastating to the male nervous system. Anxiety activates the stress response, releasing adrenaline and tightening blood vessels, the exact opposite of what supports a strong erection. Blood flow becomes inconsistent, sensitivity drops, and arousal becomes harder to sustain. Many men mistake these anxiety-driven moments as proof that their penis is failing, when in truth it is the emotional environment around intimacy that is interrupting their body's natural response. The more a man worries, the more his body fights against him. The mind and erection are directly linked, and fear shuts that link down faster than anything else. Women sense this internal struggle immediately. They feel when a man is in his head instead of in the moment. They notice when he is preoccupied with performance, when he is anticipating failure, or when he is disconnected from the shared experience. This emotional distance affects their arousal as well, not because of his size or his physical capability, but because they no longer feel his presence. Female desire thrives on emotional connection, and a man who is battling his own insecurity inadvertently blocks the very signals that stimulate her brain's pleasure pathways. But when men begin to shift their mindset, something remarkable happens. When they start interpreting their body's changes with understanding instead of judgment, when they stop measuring themselves against a past version and begin embracing the reality of mature sexuality, their entire experience transforms. Erections become more dependable as stress decreases. Sensation increases when anxiety lifts. A man who accepts his body gains the ability to engage more fully with his partner, creating intimacy that is richer, calmer, and far more satisfying. This psychological reset is the foundation for stronger performance after 50. It is not about chasing youth, it is about reclaiming the confidence and presence that make intimacy meaningful at any age. When you stop believing that your size or your performance defines your masculinity, your body responds with a steadiness and strength that come from genuine self-assurance. As men get older, they often overlook one of the most powerful truths about female attraction: women in their 50s, 60s, and beyond respond far more to a man's overall vitality than to any specific physical attribute. Vitality is not about looking young or acting like you did decades ago. It is the combination of energy, emotional presence, mental steadiness, and the sense of inner strength a man carries with him. These qualities create a psychological impression that women instinctively register. They sense when a man is grounded, calm, confident in his skin, and connected to his own masculinity. This emotional signature activates their desire in a way that size never could. Vitality is expressed in subtle yet powerful ways. A man with good circulation often carries himself differently. His posture is more open, his breathing slower, his movements more deliberate. His erection responds more consistently because his body is not battling stress or internal tension, and women pick up on that stability immediately. They can feel when a man has taken care of his health, when he has energy that is not forced or rushed, and when he engages in intimacy with awareness rather than anxiety. These signals speak to the female brain on a deeper, more instinctive level than physical measurements. Another factor women respond to strongly is emotional presence. Women are highly attuned to whether a man is truly with them in the moment or lost in self-doubt. A man who listens, who pays attention to her reactions, who adjusts his rhythm naturally, and who expresses desire with confidence creates a sense of trust that intensifies her arousal. This emotional alignment stimulates her brain far more than size ever could, triggering anticipation, connection, and pleasure. When a man approaches intimacy with focus rather than fear, her body responds with more openness and enthusiasm. Even small behaviors can communicate vitality and masculine presence. The way a man touches his partner, the steadiness of his hands, the intention behind his movements, the tone of his voice, all these elements combine into a psychological impression of strength and competence. Women describe these qualities as far more important than size because they shape the entire experience. A man's ability to maintain a stable erection through calmness and connection often feels more desirable to a woman than any anatomical feature. She interprets this steadiness as emotional reliability and physical readiness, both of which enhance her attraction. At this stage of life, women are not comparing men to unrealistic ideals. They are evaluating how they feel in a man's presence. They are drawn to men who take care of themselves, who manage their stress, who move with intention, and who bring emotional warmth. These traits activate the parts of the female brain responsible for desire, safety, and pleasure. When a man shows up with vitality, he creates an atmosphere where her mind and body can respond fully. This is why the idea of an ideal size becomes increasingly irrelevant with age. Women do not want perfection, they want connection. They want a partner who knows himself, who embraces maturity, and who brings confidence that comes from experience rather than comparison. When a man focuses on cultivating vitality, through health, mindset, and presence, he naturally becomes more attractive in ways that matter far more than any number could express. Understanding this shifts the entire dynamic of intimacy and opens the door to a deeper, more satisfying connection. When you begin to understand the psychological meaning behind what women truly value, everything about your intimate life starts to shift. The pressure you once placed on size loses its weight, because you finally see that confidence, emotional presence, and vitality shape a woman's desire in ways measurements never could. A mature man who brings steadiness, curiosity, and genuine connection into intimacy becomes far more attractive than a man who relies on assumptions formed years ago. What women respond to after 50 and 60 is the man who understands his own body, who takes care of his health, who approaches sex not with fear but with intention. This is the kind of presence that strengthens erections, deepens connection, and transforms the experience for both partners. As these insights settle in, something powerful happens inside you. The tension that once held your body back begins to loosen. You stop judging your erection, and your erection becomes more reliable. You stop comparing your penis, and your arousal becomes more natural. You stop questioning your worth, and your partner feels the difference instantly. Intimacy becomes less about proving yourself and more about exploring connection. This shift is what so many men over 50 describe as liberating, because it frees them from decades of silent pressure and allows them to show up with a confidence that feels both grounded and authentic. Women sense this evolution immediately. They feel when a man steps into intimacy with clarity instead of fear, presence instead of distraction, desire instead of performance anxiety. Their body responds to this transformation with openness, excitement, and trust. And as your confidence grows, so does your ability to create experiences that feel meaningful, pleasurable, and deeply connected. The irony is that the moment a man stops obsessing over size is often the moment he becomes the lover he always wanted to be. Strength returns, steadiness improves, and intimacy becomes richer because the mind and body are finally working together. This understanding becomes the foundation for a new chapter in your sexual life. When you embrace the truth about female psychology, when you prioritize connection over comparison, and when you cultivate your own vitality from the inside out, you step into a version of yourself that is far more attractive than any number could define. And the best part is that this growth continues. Each intimate experience becomes easier, more natural, and more fulfilling as the old beliefs fade and the new mindset takes root. If you reached this point of the video, tell me in the comments by writing the phrase "This message was for me." It is always powerful to see how many men are on the same journey towards stronger confidence and better intimacy. And if the insights here helped you, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because there is much more you can unlock when you understand how your body and mind truly work. There is also another video right here that expands on this topic in a way that will help you go even further, so click and continue with me while you build the confidence and performance you deserve.